You've probably heard that Social Security is running out of money by 2032. Maybe a family member brought it up at Sunday dinner. Maybe you saw a scary headline while you were scrolling through your phone. And here's the thing, that date is real. It comes straight from the government's own numbers. But something happened yesterday that almost nobody has explained to you clearly yet, and it changes this story in a real way. 6 United States senators, 3 Democrats and independents, and 3 Republicans stood up together and introduced an actual bill to do something about it. Not a talking point on a cable news show. Not a campaign, promise. A real piece of legislation filed in the United States Senate on July 14th, 2026, just yesterday as I'm recording this. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly what this bill does, who these 6 senators are, what that 2032 date actually means for your check, and a genuinely encouraging piece of news about next year's cost of living raise that most people haven't even heard about yet. Everything I'm about to tell you comes straight from the official Social Security Trustees Report and verified reporting on the actual text of this bill. I'm not going to guess, I'm not going to speculate, and I'm not going to scare you for the sake of views. Just what's really happening, explained plainly, so you can understand it and get on with your day. Let's start with who these 6 people actually are, because honestly, the who here might be the most surprising part of this whole story. On the Democratic side, you have Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, who is retiring at the end of this term, and Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. Standing right alongside them is Senator Angus King of Maine, who serves in the Senate as an independent. And on the Republican side, you have Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Senator John Cornyn of Texas, and Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina. 6 people. 6 different states, from Maine all the way down to Louisiana. Different parties, different politics on almost everything else you can think of. And yet here they are, standing together on this one issue. A couple of these senators are worth pausing on for just a moment, because their circumstances tell you something about why they were willing to put their names on this now. Senator Durbin has already announced he is retiring, so this is not a re-election move for him. This is something he chose to spend some of his remaining time in office on. On the Republican side, Senator Cassidy has spoken publicly about wanting to see real Social Security reform get done before he leaves office as well. When you have senators who are on their way out putting energy into something like this, it is often a sign that they see it as unfinished business worth pushing forward, rather than a political talking point aimed at the next election. Now, I know politics can feel exhausting these days. It can feel like nobody agrees on anything anymore. So when 6 senators from opposite sides of the aisle put their names on the very same bill, that is worth pausing on for a moment. This is not a Democratic plan dressed up to look fair. It is not a Republican plan either. It is genuinely, evenly bipartisan. 3 and 3. And I am going to keep it that way as I walk you through it. No cheering for one side, no blaming the other, just the facts, laid out plainly. So what does this bill actually do, step by step? At its heart, it creates something called an independent, bipartisan advisory committee. Let me give you a simple picture of what that means. Imagine your own family's finances were in some trouble, and instead of everyone arguing about it around the kitchen table, you brought in one trusted, neutral financial advisor that both sides of the family agreed to listen to. That is roughly the idea behind this committee. It would study Social Security's finances in real detail, and then hand Congress a formal set of recommendations on how to fix the shortfall. But here's the part that makes this particular bill different from a lot of proposals that have come before it. It does not just politely ask Congress to consider some recommendations someday. It is built to actually force Congress's hand. Once the committee's recommendations are ready, the bill sets up a process to turn them into a real, formal piece of legislation. And that legislation is guaranteed an actual vote, not buried quietly in a committee room somewhere, not left to gather dust for years. A real, up or down vote on the floor of Congress, on a plan specifically designed to keep Social Security financially solid for at least the next 50 years. That guarantee of an actual vote is a bigger deal than it might sound like at first. If you have paid any attention to Washington over the years, you already know that Congress is very good at forming committees and studying problems, and not nearly as good at actually standing up and voting on the hard answers. And this is not the first time lawmakers have tried something like this. Just a couple of years ago, back in 2024, a separate group in the House of Representatives tried to set up a similar kind of debt commission, one that was also meant to eventually tackle Social Security's finances, among other things. That effort did not end up going very far. I mention that not to be discouraging, but because it is honest context. It shows you that the idea of an independent, forced vote process is not brand new. And it also shows you why the people behind this new bill built in that guaranteed vote requirement so deliberately this time around. They appear to be trying to learn from what did not work before. Now, let's pause here for a moment, because I just used some words that might make some of you a little uneasy. Solvency, insolvency, funding shortfall. I want to stop right here and explain, in plain language, exactly what that actually means for you and your monthly check. Because honestly, this is the part that so much of what you see online gets wrong, and it ends up scaring people for no good reason. Let me walk you through the mechanics just a bit more, broken into simple pieces, because I know this kind of process can sound confusing if it is read out too quickly. First, the advisory committee gathers input, including public input from everyday Americans, not just lawmakers behind closed doors. Second, that committee sends a base bill to Congress, one that has to guarantee at least 50 years of solvency for the program. Third, that base bill goes through the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee, the two committees that normally handle Social Security matters, for hearings and possible changes. And fourth, it then gets brought to the floor of both the Senate and the House for a set period of debate where lawmakers can propose amendments before that final, guaranteed vote happens. It is a structured, step-by-step process, built specifically so the issue cannot simply be quietly buried the way so many similar efforts have been in the past. Insolvency does not mean Social Security disappears. It does not mean your check simply stops arriving one day. I want to say that as clearly as I possibly can, because so much of what circulates online skips right past this detail and jumps straight to panic. Here's what is actually true. Social Security is funded in two different ways. There is a trust fund that has been built up over many decades, and there are the payroll taxes that working Americans pay in every single day, out of every paycheck. Right now, those two sources together are enough to cover full, scheduled benefits for everyone. According to the 2026 Social Security Trustees Report, the trust fund itself is projected to run dry sometime in the fourth quarter of 2032, so roughly 6 years from where we're standing today. But here is the part people often miss. Even after that trust fund is used up, the payroll taxes do not stop coming in. Working Americans keep paying into the system every single day, and that money keeps flowing right back out as benefits to retirees. So even in the most pessimistic scenario possible, one where Congress does absolutely nothing at all between now and then, Social Security would still be able to pay out roughly 78% of scheduled benefits, using nothing but that ongoing payroll tax revenue. Let me say that a different way, because that number really matters. 78% is not zero. It is nowhere close to zero. It represents a real, meaningful reduction that nobody wants. And it is exactly the kind of cut this bill and others like it are trying to prevent from ever actually happening. But it is not the end of the program, and it never has been. Think of it less like a light switch flipping off and more like a paycheck that shrinks a bit if nothing changes between now and then. Uncomfortable? Absolutely. A total collapse of the program? No. And this bill is a direct attempt to make sure that reduction never has to happen at all. And I want to be specific about the timeline too, because vague dates tend to cause more worry than clear ones. We are talking about the fourth quarter of 2032. That is roughly 6 years away. It is not next year. It is not even close to next year. That gives Congress real time to act, and it gives this bill, and any others like it, a real runway to actually pass before that date ever becomes relevant. So let's take a short breath here, because I want to make sure that reassurance actually landed with you before we keep going. Social Security is not vanishing in 2032. It is facing a real, well-documented financial challenge. And for the first time in a long while, a genuinely bipartisan group of lawmakers is actually trying to do something about it before that date ever arrives. Now let's talk about why this shortfall is happening in the first place, because understanding the why helps everything else make more sense. A handful of different forces are feeding into this, and none of them are any one person's fault, and none of them are new information to the people whose job it is to study this program for a living. Birth rates in the United States have been lower than they were in past generations, which simply means fewer new workers are entering the system to pay in over time. Immigration, which has historically added new workers and new taxpayers into the system, has also slowed in recent years. And there is one more piece worth mentioning, honestly. A major tax and spending law passed in 2025 is projected to reduce trust fund revenue somewhat over the coming years as well. I want to be very careful here and simply state that plainly, without taking any side on that law itself, good or bad. It is simply one of several contributing factors reflected in this year's trustees' report numbers. None of these forces snuck up on anyone overnight. Actuaries and economists have been watching the shortfall build for years, quietly, in report after report. What is new, as of yesterday, is that 6 sitting senators finally put their actual names on paper to try to do something meaningful about it. Here is something else worth knowing, because it helps put this moment in perspective, and it is not the first time Congress has faced a cliff quite like this one. Back in the early 1980s, Social Security was staring down a very similar kind of shortfall, and Congress, at that time, actually rose to meet it. They brought in a bipartisan commission, they studied the numbers honestly, and they made real changes, including gradually raising the full retirement age from 65 up to 67. That reform, roughly 40 years ago now, is a big part of the reason the program has remained as stable as it has for as long as it has. Think about everything that has changed in this country over 40 years. New technology, new generations entering the workforce, entire industries rising and falling. And through all of that change, the basic structure of Social Security has stayed largely the same, resting on a fix that was put in place decades ago. That is genuinely how long it has been since Washington last made a serious, structural fix to Social Security. And in all the years since then, plenty of similar bipartisan proposals have been introduced with good intentions, only to quietly fade away without ever becoming law. So I want to be honest with you here too, because you deserve honesty, not hype. This bill is not a guaranteed done deal. Getting 6 senators to agree on something is one thing. Getting the full Senate, the full House of Representatives, and a president to all sign off is a much bigger climb, and there is real uncertainty ahead. I am not going to sit here and tell you this is a sure thing, because it isn't, and anyone who tells you otherwise is getting ahead of the actual facts. But I also do not want you walking away from this discouraged, because there is a real, meaningful other side to that same coin. The fact that this effort is genuinely, evenly bipartisan. 3 senators from one side, 3 from the other, gives it a real fighting chance that purely one-party proposals almost never get in Washington. And the pressure on Congress to act is only going to keep building as 2032 gets closer and closer. So think of this as the first serious move in what is likely to be a longer conversation over the months ahead, and I plan to be right here with you, walking through every twist and turn as it develops. All right, let's shift gears for just a moment, because I promised you some genuinely good news earlier, and I meant it. While all of this Social Security funding conversation has been unfolding, there is a separate, more immediate story developing that is actually pretty encouraging for anyone currently receiving a monthly Social Security check. Every single year, Social Security benefits get adjusted for inflation through something called the Cost of Living Adjustment, or COLA for short. This year, in 2026, that adjustment came in at 2.8%. Now, based on fresh inflation data that came out in July of 2026, independent analysts who track this number closely are estimating that the 2027 COLA could come in somewhere around 3.7 to 3.8%. I want to be careful with you here, because I promised you no fuzzy numbers and no false hope in this video, and I intend to keep that promise. This figure is an estimate, not a final, locked-in number. The official announcement for the 2027 COLA does not come until later this year, once the last of the necessary inflation data has been collected and calculated. So please treat this as a here's where things appear to be trending number, not a guaranteed promise carved in stone. But trending upward, and trending upward fairly meaningfully compared to this year's 2.8%, is genuinely good news. And I would much rather you hear about that trend now, from a trustworthy source, than stumble across it in some confusing headline this coming fall. It also helps to understand, in simple terms, why this number moves around so much between now and October. The government calculates the COLA using an inflation measure that looks specifically at prices during the months of July, August, and September. So right now, we are sitting in the very beginning of that measuring window. As those summer months of data come in, the estimate can shift up or down a bit before the final number is locked in. That is simply how the math works, not a sign that anyone is manipulating anything behind the scenes. And I know for a lot of you watching that COLA number is not just an abstract statistic. It is the number that decides whether your monthly check keeps pace with your grocery bill, your utility bill, and everything else that has gotten more expensive over the past year. So even though this is an estimate, and I want to keep treating it as one, a trend running noticeably above last year's 2.8% is a genuinely welcome sign heading into the fall. So here is where all of this leaves us, taken together. On one hand, you have a real, honest, roughly 6 years out challenge facing Social Security's trust fund. And for the first time in quite a while, a genuinely bipartisan group of senators willing to put their actual names on a real, structured fix, instead of simply talking about one on the campaign trail. On the other hand, you have a near term cost of living increase that is currently tracking noticeably higher than last year's. Neither one of these two stories cancels the other one out. They are simply both true at the very same time, and I believe you deserve to hear the full picture, not just the scary half of it. If there is one single thing I want you to walk away from this video with today, let it be this. Social Security is not vanishing. It is facing a real, well-documented, well-understood challenge, and the people whose actual job it is to fix that challenge are, right now, genuinely trying. Together, across party lines, in a way that simply does not happen very often in Washington these days. That is not nothing. In fact, I would call that a genuinely hopeful place for this story to be starting from. I am going to keep following this bill closely as it moves, or possibly does not move, through Congress over the coming weeks and months, and I will bring you the updates the very moment there is something real and confirmed to report, the same honest way I always try to do things here on this channel. No hype, no fear-mongering, no invented numbers. Just what is actually happening, straight from the source, and what it genuinely means for you and for your check. If you found this helpful today, please take a second and hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next update on this story, because I promise you, this one is far from finished. There will be committee hearings, there will likely be pushback from various corners, and there will almost certainly be more twists along the way. And I intend to walk you through every single one of them, calmly and honestly, right here, the same way I try to walk you through every story on this channel. And if you have questions about how any of this might affect your own situation or your own benefits, drop them down in the comments. I read through them, and stories like this one are exactly the kind of thing I want to keep covering for you, clearly and without the noise. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the very next one.